Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben, this is Books with Genghis Khan, and I am so excited to bring you the next part of my countdown of favorite audiobook narrators. This one is getting closer to my favorites of all time, so this is counting down 15 through 11 on my list, and really I'm to the point where I love these narrators unreservedly. I just look at these five and think, how could they possibly not be in my top 10? And then I looked at my top 10 and think I can't take anyone out of there. So, I love these narrators. They have enriched so many reading experiences, and we're to the point where a lot of these I've listened to for over 100 hours, just spent a lot of time with them. And so I just feel a very close affinity to them just for how long you might spend with them speaking into your ear and telling you these meaningful stories. And at number 15, this is definitely one of those, since I have listened to this narrator for over 200 hours across many books, and this is Kate Reading. So, I have listened to Kate Reading throughout the Stormlight Archive and all 15 Wheel of Time books as she split them up with her husband, Michael Kramer. So she would voice the chapters that were predominantly from a female POV, and Kate Reading, I know she's a huge name in fantasy because besides some of these biggest series, she's also done The Memoirs of Lady Trent by Marie Brennan that I want to get to, and Codex Alera by Jim Butcher, yet another fantasy series I'm excited to try. And besides that, she's done a ton of things over the years, and a lot of historical romance I saw that I probably wouldn't be interested in, but for her epic fantasy, I think she has a very strong place in a lot of people's hearts because she voices a lot of these young adult female characters who are very strong-willed, but who have a good-heartedness to them and who are trying to overcome their challenges and save others and do good. And so characters like Shallan and Egwene and Nynaeve, Elaine, and most recently Yumi from Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And I just thought her most recent performance was astounding. Kate Reading, definitely getting up there in years. She's been doing this for a very long time, but she has a very young-sounding voice and a youthful spirit, and this really good-heartedness that I think comes through, and a lot of wisdom, and just all kinds of vitality that comes through her narration. And I have always connected to it. Definitely as one of the first narrators I really listened to in fantasy through the Stormlight Archive, but have enjoyed just the long journey through Wheel of Time and her recent work. So the sample I'm going to play for you is from Yumi and the Nightmare Painter.
Yumi sat and swallowed, never so crass as to try to feed herself. This was a ritual, and she was an expert in those. Though today she couldn't help feeling distracted. It was 19 days past her 19th birthday. A day for decisions. A day for action. A day to, maybe, ask for what she wanted. It was 100 days until the big festival in Torio City, the grand capital, seat of the Queen. The yearly reveal of the country's greatest art, plays, and projects. She had never gone. Perhaps this time.
At number 14 is Travis Baldree. So I've listened to Baldree for about 132 hours, and most of that was throughout the entire Cradle series. So 12 books there. And also, last year, Legends in Lattes, his own book that he narrated, and I look forward to listening to Bookshops and Bone Dust, the prequel, very shortly soon. And Baldree has done a lot of narrating, but for a lot of series that are pretty off my radar, there are a lot of kind of progression fantasy and cultivation things, and a lot of self-pub. So a series like Beware of Chicken, I want to try that one out. But I don't think I'll be doing too many other series by Baldree, unless he starts doing more of the traditional epic fantasy stuff. But Baldree has an extremely fun, distinctive voice. So he is not one of these people that was a voice actor tradition. Like, he was a video game designer, and then he left that career and just fell into audiobook narrating. And he has this like nasally voice that it is very distinctive. It sets him apart. And just his default narration is really enjoyable to listen to. He brings so much energy, so much emotion to his narration, every line, and then especially to the voices. He just gives it his all. And a lot of the voices throughout Cradle were just so fun. And so I'll give you a little bit of a sense of that through the sample, but just the wide range of fun voices you can only get through listening to lots of the books. White tries to inject a lot of humor into these books, and Baldree just sinks his teeth into that and is fantastic with a lot of that comic relief. And I think just one of the main reasons why people love listening to that series so much. And honestly, I don't think I would have continued that series beyond the first couple books if I didn't love the audio. I wasn't getting too attached to the story or the writing and kind of text form, and it was just listening was so much fun that I just binged all the ones that were out last year, and then ended up getting pretty attached eventually. So yeah, Baldree was just so engaging. But here's a little sample from earlier in the series with two of the main characters, Lyndon and Ethan.
Lyndon reached into his pocket, knowing what he would find, and withdrew Suriel's marble. A ball of pure glass sat on his palm, its sapphire flame steady, casting blue light over him. "Do you know what this is?" Lyndon asked, and he wasn't sure if he was afraid or excited. "I wasn't sure at first," Ethan said, reaching into his own pocket. "Not everything that blocks my senses is from the heavens." He pulled out his own glass marble the size of a thumbnail. "And yours looks somewhat different from mine." Inside the hollow shell was a ball of perfectly round darkness. It looked endlessly deep, like a bottomless hole suspended in glass. Ethan held it up to one eye, inspecting it. "Maybe they're like coins," he mused. "This could be the celestial equivalent of tossing a scale to a servant." Lyndon had so many questions that they all tried to exit his mouth at once. Came out together, so they sounded like blah. Ethan nodded as though that was exactly the question he'd expected. "Yes, precisely. Well, let's trade stories when we're not surrounded by hostile strangers."
At 13 is Ralph Lister. So I've only heard Ralph Lister for 52 hours, and that's just from the first 3 books of the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. So he only did Gardens of the Moon, Deadhouse Gates, and Memories of Ice before the narrator switched to Michael Page, which was a shame because I thought Lister was just absolutely perfection for the tone and atmosphere of Malazan and the requirement to do hundreds and hundreds of different distinctive character voices. Lister hasn't done too much that would be on my radar, but he has done some of James Clavell's historical fiction, so I want to read Shogun, and then Richard Nell's Ash and Sand trilogy, and then a popular YA series that I don't know if I'm ever going to try, but that's Mage Errant by John Bierce. And so I might do a little bit more by Lister, but just I'm feeling so sad that he didn't get a chance to really just be the sole narrator for Malazan, because I think with his just kind of gruff, gritty voice, the intelligence, the emotional intelligence, and the range of voices that he could do was just the exactly right narrator, and it helped when I was listening. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to comprehend Malazan going into audio, but I really loved it. I think his narration and reading it immersively or just listening really made it easier to follow what was going on, because he was so amazing with different voices, and his cadence just helped me understand the text. And so I was just enraptured by his performance, and can't wait to, whenever I reread Malazan, to experience that again through those first 3 books. So here I'm going to give you a sample from Gardens of the Moon.
Quick Ben glanced up. "Others are coming, Pearl. You're in for a fight." The demon lifted its gaze. Above them, glowing figures descended. 5 in the first wave, 1 in the second. This last one radiated such power that Quick Ben shrank back, his blood chilled. The figure had something long and narrow strapped to its back. "Ben a Defont Delat?" Pearl said plaintively. "See the last one who comes? You send me to my death." "I know," Big Ben whispered. "Flee, then. I will hold them enough to ensure your escape. No more." Quick Ben sank down past the roof. Before he passed from sight, Pearl spoke again. Ben de Fondellat, do you pity me? Yes, he replied softly, then pivoted and dropped down into darkness.
At number 12 is a big heavy hitter in fantasy narration. That is Simon Vance. So I've listened to Vance for 268 hours. And I've listened to him throughout the entire Lightbringer series. All 5 books I did purely in audio. The Chronicle of the Unhewn Throne trilogy by Brian Staveley. And interestingly, I didn't end up loving either of those series, but I did think Vance really elevated those and elevated the texts and at least had me engaged more than I would have been, I think, if I had just read those. But then, more recently, I listened to Fire and Blood by George R. R. Martin, his fictional history book, and Vance was so captivating with that. And I have been doing a reread of one of my favorite series, Temeraire by Naomi Novik, just by audio since I read that the first time fully in print. And now I've just been having fun listening to it and experiencing that story in a different format. And with Temeraire and Fire and Blood, I finally found material for me that I think lives up to Vance's talents. And I can't wait to do even more with Vance that's higher quality or that hits with me, connects with me more, like, because he has done a lot of Guy Gavriel Kay's books, including Tigana, Under Heaven, and a bunch more. The fantasy series Iconoclast by Mike Schell, and he's one of the many narrators on a lot of the Dune books. He's done all of Sherlock Holmes, the Cushiel Dart sequel series he was the narrator for, and he's done a lot of other, I think, classic literature that I might get around to because he's the narrator as well. Vance, I think, connects to a lot of people. He just has this rich, stately voice. If Lister's was more gritty, Vance's is just smooth. He is just such a workhorse at just delivering this smooth narration that keeps me immersed through long books and fantasy series. It's not that Vance doesn't put a lot of energy into doing distinctive voices, and he does, and I really enjoy the voices, but it's just, there's just something so impressive to me about his default narration that always just seems to captivate me. And so, I just, whether he's doing dialogue or internal monologues, I can't get enough with Simon Vance. I'll be giving a sample from Book 1 of Temeraire. That's His Majesty's Dragon. So here we go.
I do not know what I would do if I could not have escaped. She finished softly, and they all began to slump down in fresh misery, huddling together again, until Temeraire stopped and said with sudden decision, I will tell you what we shall do. If ever you need to rescue Catherine, or you Berkeley, Maximus, I will help you, and you will do as much for me. Then we do not need to worry. I do not suppose anyone could stop all 3 of us, at least not before we could escape. All 3 of them appeared immeasurably cheered by this excellent scheme. Lawrence was now regretting the amount of rum he had consumed, for he could not properly form the protest he felt had to be made, and urgently.
Enough of that, you damned conspirators. You will have us hanged a great deal sooner than we will,
Berkeley said, thankfully on his behalf.
Will you have something to eat now? We're not going to eat until you do, and if you're so busy to protect us, you may as well begin by saving us from starvation. I do not think you are in any danger of starving, Maximus said. The surgeon said only 2 weeks ago that you are too fat. The devil!
At number 11 is Jefferson Mays. So I've listened to Mays for 150 hours just throughout the entire Expanse series, all 9 novels, and all of the novellas and short fiction as well. And he has not done too much else yet that I've seen. He's one of the 2 narrators in the Found in the Lost short fiction collection from Ursula Le Guin that I want to get to. I haven't seen too much else, so hopefully he will just continue a lot more in adult fantasy and science fiction. Because Mays just brings so much nuance and intelligence, and was just the pitch-perfect narrator for the Expanse series in particular. He's not a narrator that I think is going to wow you in a 1-minute sample, like a lot of these other narrators where it's just so obvious the performing chops they're bringing to the table. it was probably only a few books in, after book 2, 3, that I started to even really warm up to Mays. But when I did, I got so attached that I stopped doing a lot of actually reading from my print books and was just listening to the audio for most of the second half of the series, or doing it immersively, because I didn't want to miss out on his interpretation and what he was bringing. He changes his voice very subtly for the different characters, where it didn't sound like a completely different person, but just enough where it completely felt like he was embodying that character, whether it was Holden or Amos, as you'll hear in the sample, or Bobby and Avasarala, and all these characters have very different personalities and priorities, and Mays was just so good at bringing those out. And so yeah, this is one where you might need to listen for a few books to really be convinced, but I do think that they found the absolutely right narrator for this series, and definitely became one of my favorites because of that. And yeah, don't know if it would have been the same just reading those books, but I fell in love. So let's listen to a sample from the first book, Leviathan Wakes, as Holden and Amos are getting to go on a little bit of a reconnaissance mission.
Naomi, you'll be driving the salvage mech, and the three of us will tether on and catch a ride down to the wreck. Shed, you stay with the mech unless we find an injured person, which seems unlikely. Amos and I will go into the ship through that hole and poke around. If we find anything even remotely booby-trap-like, we will come back to the mech. Naomi will fly us back to the night, and we will run away. Any questions? Amos raised one beefy hand. Maybe we ought to be armed, Exo, in case there's piratey types still lurking aboard. Holden laughed. Well, if there are, then their ride left without them. But if it makes you feel more comfortable, go ahead and bring a gun. If the big burly earther mechanic was carrying a gun, it would make him feel better too. But better not to say it. Let them think the guy in charge felt confident.
Alright, that takes us up to the top 10, where I'll pick up with the next video in this series. So let me know which out of these narrators you have also loved and enjoyed, or if you end up not connecting to some of these. I think it's very understandable, especially with Kate Redding, who's a narrator for some of the most popular books. I know that not everyone's the biggest fan, but tell me what you think, and yeah, I'll catch you later.